What if a life-altering accident became the catalyst for your greatest growth? Our guest, Jacob McGill out of Canada, survived a crash that shattered his body, but rebuilt himself stronger than ever, physically, mentally, and even professionally. From enabling clients to cancel orthopedic surgeries with movement therapy, to applying his 100-year plan to achieve extraordinary success in digital marketing, Jacob's story will leave you inspired and equipped with practical strategies for your own wellness and even your business. Welcome to WellWaveNOW, your portal for actionable wellness insights. We, Breck Rice, Dr. Bob Levine, and me, Tim Daniels, are your wellness catalysts. We're committed to elevating your health, enhancing your functionality, and optimizing your performance at every life stage. We're WellWaveNOW, where timeless wisdom lights your wellness path. Today, as I mentioned, we have the privilege of welcoming Jacob McGill, a true wellness hero. At 17, Jacob survived a horrific car accident that left him with shattered arms, neurological trauma, and severe soft tissue damage. He defied every single medical expectation by restoring full function and even surpassing his pre-accident abilities. Jacob has not only reclaimed his life, but also helped others in wellness and business. His 100-year plan framework, originally designed to optimize healthspan, has since become a core differentiator in his successful digital marketing business. Today, we will learn how he did it and how his principles can help you in your wellness and your work.
So welcome to the show, Jacob. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I've done podcasts before, but never a panel. So I'm really excited to have the group experience.
With all that keto background you've got, we'll learn about, other stuff. It takes three of us to come after you, Jacob. So we're going to
That's awesome. So, to get started, take us back to that day when the accident occurred, and what exactly were the physical and mental disabilities that you found yourself immediately having in your life?
Okay. The first thing I need to be really transparent about is this is hearsay. And that's one of the protective mechanisms of the brain, right? When I ended up coming out of the coma, all I honestly had was a blank spot. So everything I'm telling you is what's been told to me, basically. I remember vaguely earlier that day, but basically just growing up in a small town as a teenager on an acreage. I lived, we measured it in minutes, not distance, actually. It's like 20 minutes out of town. And part of that road to get there was gravel. And so I ended up on some gravel. I was a young driver. Like, we all started driving fairly young, but as experienced as I was with driving, I wasn't really experienced with reactions. Let's just call them that. And so I ended up sliding on some fresh gravel into the ditch. And the real issue was the panic. So at speed, I tried to get out of the ditch. And for anybody listening, never, ever, ever do that. Stay in the ditch, ride it out, slow the vehicle down. Because when you turn at speed, the tire caught the ground, came off, rim caught the ground. And so the truck went up in the air once, rear, front, roof. So it was a 3-time somersault. This is apparently the distance between two telephone poles or power poles on the side of the road there. And I was conscious when a neighbor who was on his way home after work, saw me dangling out of the side of the truck upside down in the ditch. And they sent for help. Eventually the paramedics arrived. By that point, my veins had collapsed and they had to cut into my body to give me an IV. They managed to get me to the airlift, and I was airlifted to the U of A hospital by they're called the STARS, Shock Trauma Air Rescue Service in Alberta.
Wow.
And from there, it was, again, kind of a blank piece. I was, in a coma for a while. When I woke up, I had casts on both shoulders and was scheduled for surgery on this side.
So tell us, what were the extent of those injuries? So obviously you had shoulder issues. Was it a lot of broken bones?
Broken. My right arm swung out and broke against the gear shift and then against the back. This side was broken against the door. Steering wheel had a bend in. Wow. So there was enough pressure there.
So for those listening to the audio only, multiple breaks in both arms. What were some of the other, any head injuries?
I was going to say, do you have any neck issues or?
Yeah, the rest of it, the intro by Tim was very accurate in the way that it's a lot of soft tissue damage. So as much as, there weren't a lot of orthopedic solutions, I was really, really crooked, right? We can, talk about how I started resolving it. But for example, when I first started like getting into the Pilates and some of the other stuff we'll talk about today, my toes were stacked on top of each other, and my feet were quite misshapen. My gait was out. And the good side of what happened to me is that it happened so young that I had, time to go and do something about it. I shudder to think about what would have occurred if I'd waited 10 or 15 or 20 years to start addressing it.
What about, then you also have some damage too, with all that up here, down below, then you also have rib damage. And then what about the neurological impact as well, Jacob?
So I had chest tubes, right? Because obviously bruising, lymph was leaking into my lungs and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I had those for several weeks. And then really having done a lot of rehab work and postural rehab work, the simplest way to say it is scrambled, right? But my organs were really kind of mismatched to the carriage. And that's where a lot of work ended up happening in the kind of middle years of my own rehab journey, was just adjusting that stuff.
Yeah.
Was that through manual adjustment? I'm just wondering, visceral manipulation, manual adjustment.
Well, see,
mostly through movement.
I've
got 9 modalities under my belt.
Hold on, Dr. Bob always liked to get into that solution. Breck, Mick, you like to build the story. I mean, would you let Dr. Bob get so far ahead on that?
Yeah, no. So before we jump into that, obviously you think about, both arms are obviously casted up. One of our healthcare attorneys, has a lot of horses, and he had a young horse that decided to shoot through the gate, and it wasn't enough room for his legs and the horse, and so he put his both hands out to catch the posts on both sides, and of course shattered the wrists in both hands. And of course, our question to him was, "Your both hands are casted. How do you wipe yourself?" So there's got to be some day-to-day life activity that was completely altered, right? How do you deal with that, and how do you recover from that?
I mean, they didn't release me for quite a while, so I think that's the big part of it. Like, I spent most of the time I was actually extremely limited just in a hospital bed, and I was.
And as I got ready to release you and follow it up, also I think it's important to kind of hear what was their prognosis? What were the doctors saying to you about you? How you saying, how were they optimistic? Were they not optimistic? Were they saying, Jacob, you're going to be just fine? Or what were they telling you as well?
I'm gonna give you a little bit of a weird analogy, but I had this plate removed a while back, like recent relative to the terms of the accident. And when you go in for that, they gave me a nerve block, pulled up this little screen, and went to work. And that little screen is kind of like the difference in the healthcare system, or how they treated me as a 17-year-old, or all that sort of stuff. That screen was just up. Like, I basically woke up in the hospital bed. One of the benefits of the coma is I didn't hear he might not make it, he might not live, he might not walk, he might not wake up. Like, all the stuff that my parents heard had passed by the time I actually came to. And so that's one of the main things. But it was a unique situation as well, because when I asked certain questions, like, I still have a humeral nail in here, for example, and like the effort that it takes to put that in, I would never go through the removal process, right? Because they have to dislocate the shoulder and do some pretty nasty stuff. And when I asked the orthopedic surgeon, like, why doesn't my arm go higher than this? It's just like, because of the surgery. So the way I kind of paraphrase it in my TED Talk, so to speak, is just like, I got the "you're lucky to be alive" speech, a pat on the head, and sent home. And speaking of that screen being up analogy, walked me through the process that I was about to detox off of Demerol as well. Right? I had the casts from wrist to shoulder, both sides, and tracks up and down my thighs. They were pretty generous, I guess. But it wasn't until, I was maybe 18 or 19 and I read my first William Burroughs book that I was like, that's that thing. That's that thing that he's talking about it. I was just like angry for about 12 days and writhing around in my bed. And in some ways, really fortunate that when I left the hospital, I was returned back to an acreage 20 minutes outside of town, because I ate the T3s probably in the first day. Didn't know what else to do and didn't know what I was doing.
Right. So you're 17 years old. You're released from the hospital back home. Obviously, you have some physical limitations. So walk us through what those limitations were, and so that we can better set the stage for how you overcame those limitations.
Yeah. So the odd part is I didn't really know the limitations at that time. Like, I was mobile. At that point, I only had casts from elbow to wrist. And, then kind of got through the latter bit of summer vacation because I missed, the end of the semester and most of the summer. Casts were removed, and then I went back to high school because I had 1 year left plus the semester that I missed.
But now wait.
And so
wait. Now when you say your toes are crossed, your organs are you're telling me you walked around like Bob Levine, like Bob's okay. So
yeah, but completely blind to it, right? Just like unaware of, and that's maybe some of the neurological stuff of like kind of dissociated of the state of my being in my body. And so when I was at that point, I was just living in the you're lucky to be alive zone. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until a couple of years later that I really started like considering like there are things that need to change here. What can I do about them?
You immediately noticed that you couldn't have full range of motion though, right? You just thought that was just the soreness from the accident and eventually that would come back.
Life after surgery is what I was told.
Okay.
Right. Like having a cut that long in the shoulder and, they dislocate it, they drill down the center, they hammer a 16-inch titanium pin in there, they shove it back. And I just woke up with another head. It's just the same size as my cranium. And like eventually the swelling went away. But, again, like it was just live with it is kind of the mentality.
You were out there in the countryside, you're on acreage. You're out there chopping wood, running up and down the streets, and what like a normal Canadian, Jacob. What were you doing afterwards? Come on.
I was hanging out with books mostly. I had been playing music since I was 10. So after my wrists and hands started to work better, I did pick up the drumsticks again and kind of continue with music. And that's actually, it was still part of my estate plan anyway. And like, that's where I ended up going to school first. And, my degree is actually in music is where it all started.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and take you down this path now. So you're sitting here unaware, you're playing music here a little bit again. What caused you to realize that you had some limitations, and what caused the shift in your journey to say that you have to do something about it?
Yeah. So, it really started with the books. Like I learned to read fairly young as a way of entertaining myself. And it's just something my parents taught me, right? My dad was always showing me references. Oh, you can look that up in here. Oh, if you want to learn that, you can find this out in here. He'd finish a book and think this one was interesting. You might like it. Between that and the fact that through junior high and high school, my mom actually, and grade school as well, my mom was a librarian. So I had a choice of walking to the library, hanging out for an hour and a half, and then taking a ride home with her or getting on the school bus. And, the school bus was bumpy. It was harder to read. So the faculty that I could go out and learn stuff was always in front of my fingertips. And then I came up with a problem to solve. And so I just started learning everything I could about health and well-being and reading books on the subject and exploring that stuff. What really opened the door was getting out of my head. And it took me a long time to get into my body, but at college, the music school was inside of the arts campus, right? And in this multi-storied building, the basement was all music students and the modern dance program. And as you'd expect, the music program was heavily weighted. There's 90% guys. And then the dance program had one token male. Really great guy. We've been friends for years, but all the musicians would gather outside the dance studio, right? Because there's 90 girls in there.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
But, I made friends with some of them and watched them move. And that's really where some of the questions started. Like, how do you do that? What is that? How does that work? And one day, what's that weird stuff you guys are doing on the floor? And that was the first time I ever heard of or saw Pilates, which was one of the things that I picked up. The other stuff I started picking up just because of the neighborhood that I lived in, that sort of stuff was, I had a girlfriend at the time whose parents owned a natural food store and supplement shop and that kind of stuff. And I started learning stuff from her. She said one day, I'm going to go this weekend and get my Reiki. And I was like, me too. Like, I don't know what it is, but sign me up. And that was part of it, that mentality of just like, I'll try anything. Yeah. Open the doors to me. So the Pilates thing was a huge influence, and we'll talk maybe a bit at length about that today. And then the other thing, especially movement-based, was the osteopathic work that I'm trained in. I'm now actually certify other practitioners, but it's an offshoot of traditional osteopathic work, the UK stuff. It's got a tangent to it, and that's because the guy who developed this work was already a 4th degree black belt in judo. And when he was in his training, he was told to go because he had a built-in practice. It's like, your students are always getting injured. You'll never run out of clients. But they started doing manipulation, right? Somewhere in the 4th year, and it just didn't make sense. with the background in martial arts, he's just like, the body wants to be in alignment. You don't need to use force to get a job done. So he kept all the osteopathic techniques, but brought these martial arts principles to them. And that's actually the thing that got me interested in Aikido, was how to get the job done without force.
But you're calling them osteopathic manipulations. But so in the United States, if you want to be an osteopath and you want to do osteopathic manipulations, you got to you're going to medical school. You're going to osteopathy school. Did you do anything like that, or are these just like offshoots of
this training is the UK pathway? And so that's a 5-year training to become a classical osteopath, and they have accreditation for that in Canada as well. The stuff that I do is it precedes that in some ways, but in the end, I ended up with almost 3,800 hours of training and supervision and clinical practice and monitored hours and all that stuff.
So for those who are not familiar with the osteopathic work and the manipulation and talk about, how would you explain it to them?
Yeah, so I love, like, the founder is very quotable on this stuff, but water doesn't need to be taught to run downhill, right? You just need to set it free. And that's the mentality behind this work. And so there's no need to manipulate. And in fact, if you use some of the principles that are baked into it, you just start a conversation with the nervous system. And I broadened it out over the 25 years I've been in practice now, because I feel pretty confident when I'm having conversations with different nervous systems, right? Because there's 9.5 nervous systems running around in here, and they're all trying to do their job, and often they're just at odds with each other. And so disseminating some of that static and clearing some of that fog that's going on is usually the first steps towards cleaning up some of the stuff. Well, think about the parasympathetic nervous system versus the autonomic nervous system. They're doing completely different jobs, right? At different times, and they can misinform each other if you put enough stress or trauma into the system.
Okay, so you're just distinguishing between the different categories of function in the body, of the nervous system functioning. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, components, really. It's kind of how to look at it, especially if you take the osteopathic principle where structure governs function, and half the problems are because some sort of tubes or wires are being impacted.
So Jacob, I think so you talked about, you tried Reiki, you done Pilates, you done the osteopathic. Take us through when you said you're willing to try anything, and I think that's also part of the one of the good things. I saw Dr. Bob nod his head on that. So he's always talking about being open to things as well. And I don't think you had spent any time with Dr. Bob before. Bob is one of the leading people in at least North America on drug-free pain elimination. So he's worked and has a methodology for it. So there's overlap with what you're talking about. And he's not just eliminating pain, he's also providing and encouraging the functionality to come back in the body as well.
Yeah, and movement re-education is so important, Jacob. I know that. So it doesn't surprise me that was one of the major inputs to your getting well again. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really well said. For me, it was almost like a process of coming back into my body. Like, I started with the energy work, and honestly, people that I associated with in that realm, some of the more grounded ones, but I remember this one practitioner.
So let me hold you there for a second. The energy work is some of that is the Reiki that's meant to work on the internal energy within the body. So that worked for you. I've never tried it. I was exposed to some Chinese equivalents where I went to it. So that element worked for you.
It all works. I don't think you can claim that there's only one component, and that's what I was labeling when I'm saying some of the more grounded practitioners of that stuff. But
multimodal, right?
Well, we're all coexisting on all these different levels at the same time, and you can't like remove one and be like, that doesn't exist, but this is real. That's insane. That's my stance on it. Right. But she had told me at the time, she's just like, you don't seem to me like you're in your body at all.
Great. So let me add my 2 cents there, because you might have heard a little bias in that spoke about that. Yeah. There is a bias on that because having been in the martial arts world with some very very traditional, well-trained, great lineage, and understand how long it took them to really get into the chi flow development, energy development, and do that thing. What always bothered me about the Reiki world was somebody that said, I went off to a 2-day class and now I'm a Reiki master. So I think that's why I asked you to work for you, and that's why I also like your response and say you found somebody who was grounded in it. So I think if someone's going to and I think that's also some of what Bob talked about, the osteopathic, and you talked about the training you had taken in that. So I think it's always good to remind people that in any of these things, just don't just run after the person who just the carpetbaggers, as they used to say, or just come into town. Make sure you really do your research on who these people are and what they have and what they're trained in.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, and then I'd like to respond to Tim.
Okay, I was sort of piggybacking on Tim or refuting Tim a little bit. In my opinion, all the work that gets done by anybody involves energy work, even if they don't say or even know they're doing energy work. And also, the good thing about energy is that it's hard, I think, in my opinion, it's hard to hurt somebody doing energy work when you may not help them if you don't know exactly what you're doing, but it's really hard to hurt somebody. And anytime somebody puts their hand on and touches somebody's body or puts their hands near somebody's body, it's having an effect. And so, it's just, you can't discount. I don't know. I'm just trying to say that there's an impact that anybody can do. Any person can put their hands on somebody else or their hands near somebody else.
Just speaking from personal experience, when I got my certificate, I put it in a drawer and then I put a poster up school and it just said free energy work sessions. And I saw 3 to 5 people a week for maybe 6 months. And I can't tell you exactly when, but one day for the first time, I felt the energy.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the first time or the second time. It was the 50th or 100th.
I hear you. So I would say Dr. Bob and it's good to have debate. That's part of what we do here. They only refuted me a little bit. I think it's dangerous to people's journey, the people that don't know what they're doing in the energy. One, you can damage people with energy work if you don't know what you're doing, because there is a way in the martial arts and other ways they talk about stealing someone's energy, damaging their tissues. So if you touch them incorrectly, there's even an art that's called dim mak that used to be thought to be not really to be mystical and not exist, but I actually know someone who really knows dim mak. And so you can damage people physically, but you touch them wrong. And then secondly, you can ruin their hope if you don't know what you're doing and you're telling them you do, and they get no progress. Now, yes, I do also agree that you can, if you hug somebody, that helps them. That can help people, and you touch them, there's a chemical exchange. But I still encourage people, if they're going to look and say, I'm going to get energy work done, I'm going to get Pilates done, that they go to somebody that they really check out those providers and make sure they know what they're doing. So
that's always wise. It's always wise. It's always wise advice anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think we're missing some of that human touch just in general with everything going online and even with telehealth now? I know that, Medicare is moving away from telehealth because they want in-person visits with the 65 and older patients that are on Medicare.
Yeah, I do think it's important and it's lacking. And I think there's also, I'm trying to find a congenial way to say this, but basically, let's talk about Pilates for a minute. Like I'm super fortunate. I won't go into the full explanation right now, but I got trained to an extremely high level, both by the teachers that I had, but the environment I got to work inside. And so I got to get my 10,000 hours. And I'm using that as an example because it's just the same as, Tim, your point of energy work, right? Any 3 of you on the screen can go and take your weekend workshop and apparently come back as a trained instructor as I am, right? And again, then you're let loose on the public. And there's all sorts of examples of how that turns out poorly. And unfortunately, it doesn't show up right away. Sometimes it can take a long period of time to be like, that person really shouldn't have been doing that movement under load for that long, because you don't break immediately. Right? You can deteriorate biomechanically from poor movement, poor position, inappropriate loading, and modification isn't the thing that's taught up front. I noticed this as an issue, and I'm probably going to catch some trouble for this, but it's a massive issue in yoga, right? They do have an okay baseline 500-hour certification, but they teach generally healthy yoga to a generally healthy population, of which, 60% of the population over 30 is reporting low back pain. So you shouldn't get trained to teach healthy people. And then if you're interested, go learn the rehab perspectives. Like, this stuff should be built in from the beginning if you're going to be let loose on the public, instead of just like, it's part of your eat, love, pray journey and you just want to do yoga for yourself.
Right.
And so that's kind of a consistent thing across multiple modalities. And the more popular they get, the more watered down they get, unfortunately, too.
Well, without a true health risk assessment on each practitioner, right, that comes to your yoga class, you have no idea what stage of fitness they're in, and you just assume by looking at them, but they could have maybe just been recovering from a major car accident.
And then there's normalization, right? The brain normalizes incredibly fast. And like what some people call a 2 out of 10 in pain, I'm happy to say would be an 8 out of 10 for me, because I won't tolerate that lack of alignment. If I feel like the slightest discomfort, I'll go and handle it. Like, oh, I've been sitting too long. Let's preemptively shut this off. But that's part of the thing that makes our species fascinating, is we're so able to adapt. And like a lot of the clients I work with over the years just kind of have these various levels, layers of Stockholm syndrome, with like this malalignment and that malalignment, to the point that I'll work through an intake form with them, and it's like playing the tape backwards. If we remember like old cassette tapes, and 6, 8, 10 weeks into working with them on a weekly basis, they're like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about this injury and this injury and that injury, as this stuff comes back up to the surface. And that's really the short and non-productive answer when people come. 98% of pain is the site of a compensation pattern, not an injury. I'm a 1%er. I had a catastrophic failure.
Right.
The stats are that 1% is like a pathological issue, 1% is like a catastrophic issue. So I'm hiking, get bit by a tick, I've got Lyme's, I'm driving home from school, I go end over end 3 times. But 98% of pain, it's a cascade effect. And so they're like, why does my low back hurt? Like, because of 15 years of ignoring these 11 other smaller problems that have all layered up. And then finally your body's like, I quit.
Which gets into that. So you spend a lot of time, and you got into how you began to talk about how you help people and your training. But I think we skipped part of the journey, which was after you got back into your body, realized your challenges, began to take these things to address it. What came back to you? What changed? What changed in your life, physically and mentally, and any other way that's relevant to you?
Yeah, great question. I mean, everything changed, but really, really slowly. And what I mean by that is, like, as my posture changed, for example, like some of my personality changed, right? I didn't know myself back then as somebody walking around with like low to mid-level pain and discomfort that I just integrated as everyday life. I wasn't medicating it, but I was tolerating it, right? And so it's more like the sense of relief that came. The better my posture got, the more aligned I got. And that's one of the nice things, especially about the Pilates. So I started Pilates early on. It was the first studio to open in Edmonton, where my schooling was. And the guy who I started training under was very straightforward with me. Of like, I remember being like doing it for 2 to 3 weeks. I'm like, I want to learn this stuff. And he's like, I will help you, but I will not teach you. You need to go to my teacher. He just really respected the lineage and knew, how brilliant. So I did what I was supposed to. I had a programmatically designed for my physical limitations Pilates routine. And what I mean by that is, like, in doing leg work, lying on your back and pushing in and out on the reformer at the springs, there was a block and then a long reformer. My range of motion was limited by 10 inches, right? I could crouch 10 inches less than I can today on the same piece of equipment. And so Steve started me there and I was doing that work. But what ended up being really interesting is I was on the reformer on Friday. I went to my first workshop doing this osteopathic stuff. I came back Monday, I lied down on the reformer and he stopped me. He's just like, what have you done? And I explained to him, he's like, keep doing that stuff. Like, your body's changed. But what was really interesting about that is every time I went back to these monthly osteopathic workshops, those people kept on saying, you're retaining this stuff. Most people take a step forward and slide back. And so what I realized is the two modalities were very complementary. One opened the joints more so that I could use the second one to more easily align the structure and then strengthen. And that's the rehab triangle from the 100-year plan. Open the joints, align the structure, then strengthen. Don't strengthen shitty alignment. It's a bad idea. And that's really one of the things that kind of gave me rocket fuel for moving this forward. And so, I know it's a really long answer for your question, Tim, but it completely changed my way of being and who I am. And like, I would think I'd be a completely different person today if I hadn't done all that work. And speaking of the energy work, there's one teaching moment I remember from, when I actually left Vancouver to move to Vancouver and apprentice with Diane Miller, which I did for 8 years, trained under her and then remained a staff member there as long as I could. But she'd always tell this one story about working with a dancer and how she gave him this slight adjustment with his pelvis. And she's like, you have to hold your hips here when you're doing leg work, when you're bending and straightening your legs. And he turned to her and he said, but I'd have to change my life. And that's that stuff, right? And it's the same thing I found in the martial arts. There are certain things where you get people who want to talk about energy not existing, and then it's like, well, go try and touch one of these guys because you'll get within 7 feet and fall over. Like, how does that work if it's not energy? Because we're not dealing with the physical yet. And that kind of prepared me to understand certain things, but I was really clear there are other things I didn't get till much later. I was telling a client about this the other day. Like, I still remember my last trip to Japan and the moment this guy I was had me in the corner after class and he was trying to show me this thing. And then how I left Japan and went back to the dojo in Vancouver. And 3 months later in class one day, I was like, oh, that's that thing.
So beautiful how that comes through, and you had the epiphany that came through afterwards. So you've got your toes uncrossed now, you've got your body aligned. Are there any physical, do you consider yourself now average physical capabilities, above average? Any limitations, any residual problems?
Yes, and it's because of a very simple thing. I continue to consciously and intentionally stress my body out on a regular basis, right? As I was recovering, I got into martial arts, and accidents happen there, right? Like, people don't do that stuff because it's easy. You do it because it makes you grow. And it's the same thing with the mountains, right? And like, I have my own little personal process and journey of going to break 50 something ski days this year on my pass. Last year, after the ski season and the resorts closed, a friend of mine and I put in a 12-hour day every Wednesday for the next 3 months, going up into the mountains and like hunting snow and skiing that snow. And so there's always recovery to do. Always, always, always. I notice, when I come home from doing runs yesterday, and if I didn't do the foam roll last night, I sure did it this morning, because I don't want the deterioration and tightening to affect my next ski day. And so there's always maintenance, right? The idea that this stuff ever ends is a complete fallacy. And if you're doing anything fun, in my opinion, then you need some sort of recovery routine to balance it out, right? Like I was
maintenance.
Go ahead.
That's a good point. How you answered it. So, way I would kind of paraphrase it, there's not really limitations to your recovery. You can consider yourself a fully functioning human being, but you continue to now challenge yourself physically and mentally, and you've got a routine that helps you maintain that and recover from that.
Yeah, recover from the most recent activities, right? Okay. I was using it as an example. I was watching a blog a while back. It was just super inspiring. This couple retired, and then what are we going to do? Oh, let's do a project. So they circumnavigated Australia by running a marathon every day.
Oh, geez.
But how much time do you need to spend stretching to balance that? That was the question that came off in my head, right? Like, they must have only sleep 4 hours because they run for 4 hours. So you must be spending 4 hours stretching.
Wow.
Beautiful. So I understand that, the recovery and what they're doing. So beautiful emphasis there. We want to spend more time. We want to get into how you took all this knowledge and work on yourself and work with other, and then your 100-year plan and what that is. But before we do that, I want to turn it over to Breck.
Yeah. So, Jacob, what I find so fascinating with what you're doing, the work that you now do for others, right? And we're going to get into that in the next segment, but it's not anything that you didn't put yourself through first, right? And we have kind of a nutrition expert that we've had on a couple of times, who's a card-carrying professional bodybuilder, and he won't ever recommend a supplement or some nutrient that he hasn't tried himself and knows that it's beneficial to him. And so I love that about you and him, and your philosophies that you're going to use your own. You're going to be a product of the product, or you're going to practice what you preach, basically.
So, Jacob, if you would take us through your how you formulated all your work into something you call the 100-year plan, and we're running tight on time, so don't take it too much into how you applied it to people physically, but take it as what the 100-year plan, how you came about it, and then tell us how you apply it to your work today and helping people from the business standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. First, one little thing. And that is the proof of concept, right? The thing that Breck mentioned. And that was something that I learned first in the Pilates space, but really became true in martial arts and everything else. And that is, if you can't demonstrate it or feel it in your own body, how are you supposed to be able to teach it? And, that works everywhere. And I think it's very important to be able to internalize the stuff, right? And that's not kind of how we're taught to learn, right? It's memorize and regurgitate, which, doesn't add to a lot of things. So what I ended up doing, and this is part of your answer of what changed, Tim, is much later on now, I realized that during this decade that I spent getting my 10,000 hours, so to speak, which was really the learning phase and the lab phase and the development phase, part of the ways that I was acting out some of the trauma or the loops that were in my nervous system was just acquiring more information and knowledge and seeking out the education and the experience. And some of the people that were close to me that cared about me just tapped me on the shoulder. And they're like, maybe you're done learning. Like, maybe you need to go out and start practicing this stuff now, right? So there was a bit of a rut that I'd kind of gotten into for a while, because obviously that was like a safe and comfortable place, or it was just a way of working out some of the unresolved stuff that I had going on. But either way, after working in that studio for 8 years and then moving to a different location and just kind of hitting my head on the ceiling wherever I was, a friend called me one day and she's just like, I have your space. She'd moved to manage a different clinic. There were some physios there. There was a big open area that was empty. And I was in and had my business launched within 2 weeks of that phone call. And, due to the track record and some of the, I guess, branding that I'd done in terms of getting a little bit of my name for myself in these various spaces, I moved forward with confidence. And the biggest piece of confidence was my first resolved orthopedic surgery, just maybe 6 months before that when I was still an employee. And this client had come into a Pilates studio. She said, I have a scheduled lumbar laparoscopy for spinal stenosis, right? They're going to go into my spine and scrape away some piece of spine. And there was a scheduled surgery date. So we had a timeline to beat. And it was one of the first times that I just started doing everything that I knew instead of sticking to my lane, depending on which location I was in, and not mixing the modalities. And she went back for an MRI before the surgery date, and the surgeon signed off, no surgery, we're done. So that was the first proof that I ever got. And one of the really important things for me was it was measured at the beginning and the end, right? None of it was speculation. None of it was like, we both think you feel better, let's not check. And so I just continued with that in my own practice. But what I did do was I built that as a lab. And what I mean by that is I just kept on trialing, testing, and mixing the modalities and trying to serve the client, not just with like who they were or what they were presenting, but what was actually going on that day for them. And so I had a much broader menu that I'd never really worked through or used before. And I needed to navigate that. And so I started navigating it by building this thing I call a fact-based practice. I wanted it to stand alone on principle and not be based on anybody's opinion or ideas. So one of the simple facts, one of the triangles of the 100-year plan actually is a healthy spine has 3 curves, period, right? After you're a grown adult, you want to have a lumbar, thoracic, and cervical curve. And anybody who argues that, you might want to back away a little bit because this is how a healthy functioning spine works. Now, for the sake of an explanation, when you set the pelvis and the L spine into place, you have a hope of aligning the thoracic and cervicals on top of it. And that L-spine curve, it's only 5 vertebrae. So figuring out where the apex should be is simple. It's 3, right? 3 is the middle between 1 and 5, right? And aligning that with the pelvis, like there's your center of gravity. Your legs are below that. Everything else is above it. So each of these triangles of the 100-year plan came out to solve a problem, right? Now that one's a little bit more of a practical triangle because that's how I was taught to do rehab in terms of posture and alignment. It just makes sense. Same thing with the air, water, food triangle, right? You can only live minutes without breathing, days without hydration, and weeks without eating. Many, many, many weeks for a lot of us in North America. But out of the respiration apparatus, you have 21 muscles that you use to breathe, and 20 of them are posture muscles. So again, why not look at breathing, moving properly, and then, yeah, of course, hydrate, and then, of course, bring in nutrition. But there's a lot of people out there who will grab the latest diet trend, right? Without being properly hydrated or worrying about how aligned or how good your breathing is. And obviously posture affects metabolism, all sorts of other stuff, right? Like you can just think about the impact of peristalsis and like a terrible sitting posture versus standing and going for a walk every day. So each of these things impacts the other. And what I started to find, having now developed 64 of these equilateral triangles, is anytime I'm lost or stuck in working with a client, I break off one corner and that becomes the fulcrum. And that's where I find leverage with their well-being.
So how have you taken that pattern recognition and that fulcrum and portion, and now take it into your world that you're working on, the digital marketing with that? How have you applied that and made that a business philosophy that's helping your clients thrive, Jacob?
Great question. It all comes back to alignment. It's all about alignment. And the alignment starts here first. So people that I work with inside of the business space or inside of the healthcare space, it's really about their alignment. And when we're talking about the business side of things, most people I start with, they're not even clearly distinguishing business versus job, right? We're trained and educated to be employees. And then people are like, I'm going to strike off on my own. And that's where Robert Kiyosaki invented the S part of his quadrants, the self-employed. You get the illusion of freedom, but you're still trading the same or even more time as you would as an employee. And you don't have the psychological or emotional freedom where you can just drop that thing that's not yours and leave it at 5 p.m. and come back the next day and not care about it at all, right? It's there when you go to sleep. It's there when you wake up, and it never leaves. And so helping people understand that systems and processes are the things that make a business exist. Or when you're doing evaluation of a business, it's really the size of your list, the strength of your brand, and the quality of your systems that somebody else is going to buy from you anyway. And so helping people understand that well enough that they will let me help them build it is how I vet whether or not we're fit to work together as client and service provider.
So for our listeners, Jacob, that want more information about your process, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see what the 100-year plan is, you can just go to all letters, 100yearplan.com. If you want to speak directly to me, I have a 100% refundable consultation at consultation.100yearplan.com. And then with the 80/20 media stuff, call.8020.media will get you into a calendar where you can book with me and talk about your business aspirations.
Oh, thank you so much. And we'll put those links in the show notes for those that are subscribed to the YouTube channel. But for those listening on audio, please record those so that you know how to contact Jacob. Jacob, thank you so much for sharing your incredible story with us and your journey and how you've overcome tragedy to triumph.
Yeah.
Is the title of our segment this hour. And before we go, I want our listeners to please join the Facebook group as well. It's a great resource for you. The WellWaveNOW Healthcare Disruptors Facebook group. Leave that link in the show notes as well. We invite you, Jacob, to participate in there too. There's a lot of practitioners and a lot of people that could use your advice and your training and just know what you've gone through and that they can overcome things as well. Dr. Bob?
I just want to tell Jacob that I'm really super impressed with your recovery story, how you got yourself back, your training level, your knowledge base, really fantastic. And I certainly got a lot out of this, and I appreciate you being here with us and sharing your story. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a real privilege.
And then I'm going to steal Breck's line because Breck didn't say it, because it was really a story of your persistence there, which is common amongst our wellness heroes. Be persistent, try a lot of things, put it all together for you. Because as Breck always says, wellness, it's in you.